Okay, welcome everyone. We'll get started here. I'm Katy Wallace, and this is the Natural Solutions for Leaky Gut talk. So this talk is given to you today in partnership with the Willie Street Co-op in Madison. And I'd like to say before I start that this talk is for health education reasons only and should not be taken as specific medical advice. I offer a couple of different services through the Willie Street Co-op. One of them is providing one-on-one sessions at the store for a reduced rate of $45. So those are private 45-minute sessions, and you can contact me if you're interested. The second service I provide are these free talks. So this month we're talking about leaky gut. Next month in June, we'll be talking about heartburn and acid reflux. The title of the talk is Overcoming a Sensitive Stomach. And that is on Wednesday, June 8th at noon. So it'll be a webinar just like this one. So today we're going to talk about what is leaky gut, and then we're going to talk about ways to approach it by changing the diet and using specific supplements that help heal the gut lining and help reduce the inflammation associated with leaky gut. So I've laid it out here in an order of steps so that it seems more logical, but really you could approach any of these steps in a different order if you needed to. For most people, working on dietary changes, for example, might make the most sense. But for someone else, if there's another step that feels more accessible first, you should feel free to approach the different steps in an order that makes sense for you. All of the steps are really critical, however, for most people to be able to overcome and actually heal leaky gut. So the definition of leaky gut is hyperpermeable intestines. So what that means is that we have a digestive lining that goes all the way through our digestive tract. It's only one cell layer thick. It's kind of amazing that it has all of these functions, which we'll get into, but it's only one cell layer thick. And because of this, it is vulnerable. And when the spaces in the cell lining get bigger or more abundant than they should be, it's basically called leaky gut. So it's not the most attractive name, but it's basically describing this barrier that we normally have in our digestive system is beginning to break down. And for most people, this is coincident with the aging process. It doesn't mean that it's optimal, but it is very common. And it appears to be a prerequisite for developing chronic problems, chronic inflammation, or other forms of disease. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and at the end of the talk, I'll look through those and answer those. So here's a visual of what leaky gut could look like. So on the left, if we're looking at our gut cells through a microscope, we see healthy gut on the left. On the right, we see what it looks like when leaky gut has developed. So you can see that the cells are no longer touching each other, and they're a lot smaller, and the spaces between the cells are bigger. So leaky gut is pictured on the right. This is a cross-section drawing of what leaky gut could look like. So we're talking about the lining in the digestive system, and the gut lining has these cells that I'm pointing to with my mouse with the arrow right now that are all stacked up next to each other. And they basically help with the digestion and absorption of key nutrients, and they help support a healthy gut biome, which is the group of bacteria in the gut that provide a lot of benefit for our bodies. And the cells are held together with something called a healthy tight junction. So these are just proteins that help keep the cells together. When we experience different stressors, and I'll get into what those are, we see that the tight junctions basically fall apart. And there's space between these cells where ideally there wouldn't be. So this becomes a big deal because the digestive system is normally screening things out. It's normally acting, this lining is acting like a barrier. And when these tight junctions break down, you don't have a barrier. You don't have a very good barrier anymore. And just like this picture shows, whatever these little green things are, you can imagine that these are food particles, maybe little bits of oatmeal or whatever you're eating, kale, peas. They are going to seep through the spaces in between the cells rather than getting broken down into nutrients, which would be absorbed across the bloodstream. It could be other things too, like if you eat a bad salad bar, you get food poisoning, get pesticides on your food, then these things are all going to trickle down if there's leaky gut, if there's hyperpermeable intestines. These are all going to trickle down to the bloodstream below. And this is actually a really big deal and can be a really big problem if it goes on for too long for someone. Because the bloodstream is down here, you can see in the visual, and right below that is a mass of immune cells in our body. In fact, 80% of the lymphocytes, which is a prominent type of immune cell in our body, is right under this gut lining. And its job is to attack things and target them if we were exposed to something dangerous. So this system works well when the gut lining is intact, but if you have leaky gut, then everything is getting into your bloodstream. And the result of that is that the immune system begins to target everything, right? It's not going to target nutrients if your oatmeal is getting broken down to nutrients and those are getting absorbed. Those aren't going to get flagged by the immune system, but the immune system looks for big molecules. They're called peptides. They're protein sequences found in all foods. And so if there's these smaller pieces of foods that are not broken down to the nutrient level getting through, then the immune system is going to go, whoa, what is that? It's going to create an antibody to that. And that is going to prompt an immune response, including something called pro-inflammatory cytokine reaction, which is kind of a mouthful, but pro-inflammatory cytokines are just a lot of chemicals created by the immune system. It's kind of creating an immune storm or an immune attack. So you can imagine that this might give someone some digestive issues or some food sensitivities. The real problem, however, I mean, that's a problem in and of itself, but the real problem is that the bloodstream is getting moved around the body. So your heart beats and your blood is moving, and this immune storm that began in the gut with leaky gut is getting sent throughout your body. And that can have a lot of inflammatory consequences for other parts of your body that you wouldn't guess would be at all related to digestion. Like it could be related to a mood disorder for someone or autoimmunity in their heart because the immune storm created in the blood is sent throughout the body. So to summarize, this digestive and immune screening out process is broken when you've got leaky gut. And things are going freely into your bloodstream. Your immune system has a very bad reaction, and if this goes unchecked, scientists are finding that this can lead to a lot of problems: cancer, autoimmune disease, mood disorders, and a number of other things. So this is just another schematic to kind of reiterate the idea. I like visuals, so I like to share them with you. On the left, we have an intact gut lining. We can see large food particles would get stopped and stay inside the digestive tract. So with medium food particles, only nutrients would be allowed across. Yeast, bacteria, parasites, toxins, different things we encounter would not be allowed to cross a healthy gut barrier. However, when the gut barrier is worn down, when we have leaky gut, we're getting large particles, we're having food sensitivities and food allergies, we're having medium particles, we're getting fewer nutrients across. So a lot of people with nutrient deficiencies have leaky gut because they're just not really absorbing food very well as a result of the gut lining being in poor shape. And we've got dysbiosis, which is a fancy word for when the gut community is out of balance and we have an overgrowth or overpopulation of species that are unhealthy. This can lead to a lot of infections, and the immune system is going to see all of this stuff getting through the leaky gut, and it's going to have an inflammatory reaction, basically where, you know, we get swelling or we get pain or we get rashes or, you know, allergies of some kind. And it's such a level of inflammation that the body's not able to regroup and go back to kind of a normal state before it had the rash or before it had the food reaction. So leaky gut syndrome is the name for a condition where someone's experiencing leaky gut for several years, and this is fairly common. It can happen in any part of the body. So leaky gut can affect our brain, joints, our heart, our skin, and many other tissues in the body. So it can have a wide variety of presentations. Some people will have chronic immune problems or chronic digestive problems. Like I said, rashes are very common, or eczema. Chronic skin problems are usually a sign of leaky gut. Chronic mental health issues or issues with attention, being on the spectrum, usually have a leaky gut component. People with leaky gut typically have a lot of food sensitivities, and they feel like their food and their chemical sensitivities are increasing, and there are fewer and fewer safer places or safer foods they can eat. They'll get sick more often, or they may just have nutrient deficiencies. So you might not have all of these things, you might just have one thing. It could be your body's manifestation of leaky gut. So autoimmunity is a big problem associated with leaky gut. Over 50 million Americans, we think, have autoimmunity. And scientists now understand that developing leaky gut is a precursor to autoimmunity. And the scientists looking at this relationship between autoimmunity and leaky gut are in this field called molecular mimicry. So what that means is when we're looking at the molecular or the very small scientific structure of foods and tissues in the body, and mimicry meaning that things kind of copy each other or look like each other. So this is how we think autoimmunity can develop from leaky gut. So I already talked about how when you have leaky gut, the body can create a lot of food sensitivities. And it's doing that because the immune system targets things based on the molecular structure in the food. So the food all is made up of different peptides. If you, any food you're eating has a peptide structure, if you get down to more of the microscopic structure of the food. And our immune system reacts to things that have a big peptide structure. Peptides are like targets for the immune system. So when these peptides enter the bloodstream through the leaky gut, the immune system, like I said, is going to flag that, it's going to make an antibody, and it's going to start rallying its forces to get rid of whatever it is, whether or not it's something that's innocuous or actually harmful. The problem is that the peptide structure of the foods looks too similar to the peptide structure of our own tissues. So at the molecular level, all of our tissues are made up of peptides, just like food is made up of peptides. And this is where autoimmunity develops. So the general word autoimmunity is applied to a situation where someone's immune system is attacking themselves. And the link with leaky gut is that when we make antibodies to foods, those antibodies, like I said, remember when the heart beats, the thunk, that blood moves through the body, those antibodies can make a mistake and attack a tissue that looks just like the food or just like the other thing that got through the digestive system. So this is what the field of molecular mimicry looks at. And this study that I have listed here is an example where scientists were looking at people with multiple sclerosis and looking to see what foods seem to trigger a bigger immune reaction and more autoimmune behavior. And they found that soy, corn, spinach, and tomato all have a peptide structure very similar to peptides in the eye. So they were looking specifically at eye issues with people with MS. And they found that these foods triggered a flare-up because the body was making antibodies to these foods because of leaky gut. And then it's making antibodies to its own tissues. So anytime those foods were made, the person was having a big food reaction in their gut, which is then sending more antibodies throughout the body for them to have more autoimmune MS behavior. So it's a fascinating field. There's at least a few studies where scientists are looking at this, and I think we're going to continue to learn more about the connection between what we eat and autoimmune behavior from studies like this. At the individual level, you can get this information about yourself. This is one of the labs that I work with clients. It's called Cyrex Labs, and they're a top immunology lab in the world, really at the forefront of this science. And you can order a blood test for yourself, or a practitioner like myself can help you order a test where you find out what reactions you have and if they're linked to autoimmune behavior. So you can identify autoimmune activity years or even decades, they argue, before the disease has developed. So it's a very powerful tool for someone's health. They have these different panels here. Like you can see, there's an Alzheimer's panel. A lot of Alzheimer's activity involves autoimmune behavior to different toxins, chemicals, foods. And so this can help someone in their 40s and 50s identify a pattern, way ahead, or it can also be used for somebody who already has an Alzheimer's or Parkinson's diagnosis to see what is triggering the autoimmune behavior in the brain. So just some fascinating studies, a good way to test food sensitivities. It's very expensive though. I mean, you're going to spend several $100s for these tests, so it's not for everybody. And I would say in general, there are these general approaches, and that's what I'm going to be detailing now. So step number one would be to follow a leaky gut diet. And without having sophisticated food sensitivity testing, these are the top foods I suggest avoiding. So gluten is top because gluten is a very large peptide. I've been told that gluten has 8 to 9 peptides. So it's much larger on the molecular level than any other natural food that we know of. And so that makes it a big immune target. And that makes it actually a cause for leaky gut. There have been a couple of scientific studies where they've shown that eating gluten actually triggers the breakdown of the tight junctions in the gut. And it's the only food that I'm aware of where they've actually seen that causative process happen. I mean, there's other things that will naturally cause leaky gut too, like exposure to E. coli could cause leaky gut to happen. And the reason is, if you think about, well, why did we even develop this process of leaky gut? If you were exposed to a really nasty pathogen, like let's just pick a nasty strain of E. coli, you want your immune system to have access to that pathogen and be able to, knock it out. But the problem is when we keep getting exposed to these genetically modified foods, or we have these chemicals in the environment that unnaturally kind of open up the gut, then it can lead into some of these other chronic problems that I've been talking about. There was a really interesting study done several years ago where they took cameras and they put video cameras down people's gut to see how they responded to foods they were sensitive to. So they did the food sensitivity testing, and then they saw what happened with a video in people's gut when they ate the foods. And what they found were that so long as the people avoided the foods they were sensitive to, the gut stayed healthy and the people reported they were feeling much better. But as soon as they ate the food again, the gut just kind of miraculously opened again. in response to whatever food the person was sensitive to. So it could have been gluten, or it could have been any number of other foods. But once they were exposed to that food that they had previously had an immune response to, the gut became leaky all over again. So that tells us that this is a very dynamic process. And yes, we can follow a leaky gut diet, but it's not the ultimate solution. Because as soon as you try to reintroduce those foods, the gut's going to become leaky. So I'll talk about this in a minute. It's very important to follow a healthy diet because you have to kind of get the inflammation under control, and it'll be effective insofar as that. But to really heal leaky gut and really resolve it, you have to do more than just eat a leaky gut diet. Dairy is another food that's in this diet that's very helpful. Dairy is a very large molecular peptide structure, so that's why it can tend to be aggravating for people with leaky gut. Corn is very similar. There's something actually called corn gluten that's very similar to gluten. And people with gluten sensitivities often have sensitivities to corn, to dairy, and to almost all the other grains because they're just so similar chemically with that peptide structure. So I typically am encouraging people to avoid grains completely while they're trying to heal their gut. Soy is another example of a very big peptide structure. It's a legume, and they tend to be harder to break down. Peanuts as well. Sugar is on the list, not because it has a large peptide structure, but because when we eat sugar, we make a hormone called insulin. And the more insulin we make, the more inflammation just runs wild. So if you have food sensitivities already, or you have leaky gut and some level of inflammation in your body you're working to address, it's going to be really helpful not to eat sugar because that's going to help bring your insulin levels down, and that's going to help control the inflammation. So you don't want to eat those things, but there's actually a lot of things you can't eat. You want to eat a lot of vegetables, low starch vegetables, starchy vegetables, like root vegetables are really good. Good quality proteins like free range meats, cold water fish are all very beneficial. Fat is very helpful. So for a lot of people, if they give up grains, like gluten and corn and rice and quinoa, then they need to get calories from another source. And you can make that up with fruits and with root vegetables like beets and carrots and turnips. But you also have to make sure you're getting plenty of healthy fats. And some people may have a reason where they're limiting their carbohydrates, in which case fats are really going to be a beneficial food. So these are some examples of fats that will work well on a leaky gut diet. The picture on the left is of harvesting of palms for palm oil. We have coconut oil, we have olive oil, and we have beef tallow, which is the fat from beef. Also lard, duck fat. Some of the saturated fats from animals are very well tolerated by people on a leaky gut diet. So you're going to avoid the common inflammatory foods that I already listed. I think I also have here nightshades. Nightshades are the tomato family. Tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes sometimes are a big trigger for people. So avoiding those short term on this diet can really help. Also, eggs sometimes are a big trigger for people and need to be avoided in the short term. Another group of foods that I typically suggest people avoid are high lectin foods. So lectins are the nutrients in plants that are like its protection in nature. So, but when we eat these plant-based foods like nuts and seeds, grains, legumes are all very high in lectins because they're natural plant foods, that they're like the seed or the fruit of the plant. They're very high in lectins, and those tend to trigger more reactions in the gut. So if there's any inflammation in the gut at all, sometimes following a low lectin diet is good. There's an author named Stephen Gundry who wrote a book all about lectins, so that can be a resource. Also, it's helpful to avoid high histamine foods for some people. So some people, their immune system has just been overwhelmed for so long that they have a high level of histamines in their body. So this might look like a lot of allergies, rashes, even migraines or insomnia can be a classic sign of a histamine issue for people. So sometimes paying attention to the histamine contents in foods can help someone to feel a lot better or to overcome an immune system situation where they've got too many histamines. So those foods include ones that are cured or stored for a long time. Citrus, avocados, chocolate are also examples of high histamine foods. So sometimes you've got to kind of figure out what's going on with you, or have someone like myself help you figure out what's going on, and then design a therapeutic diet. So you do want to eat grass-fed meats. Cold water, wild fish is ideal. Fruits, I would suggest sticking to low sugar fruits like berries. Lots of vegetables, again, may need to have some caveats there about the lectins or the histamines, but generally just lots of good healthy vegetables, nourishing fats, and then the sweet potatoes and the root veggies can fill in for carbohydrates for those who need them. And this diet was actually studied by scientists in an approach to help with chronic fatigue syndrome, and was very effective for people relieving their fatigue, which was stemming from the leaky gut. This is an example of my book. It's actually, I'm waiting my first shipment today, the Body Tune-Up, and you can order this book on my website, and this explains the food program in more detail. So if you want to do this diet, I usually suggest people follow it for 6 to 8 weeks. You can get all the nuts and bolts in my book. And I like to use the idea of a bathtub as an analogy to explain why this approach is so powerful. When someone has a lot of health problems and they have a lot of inflammation, it's like the water is overflowing in the bathtub. If you just take out one food, there's so much water, maybe you get the water level down a little bit, but it's not enough for the person to really get better or to really get that inflammation under control. So that's why we take a more comprehensive approach. We take out a lot of the food triggers, and then the water level comes down much lower, and you feel much better and begin to see, oh yeah, I see a way where this is going to work. I can improve my lifestyle. I can follow this. And then over time, you can reintroduce foods to see, which ones are most critical for you to avoid. Or maybe you just need to do some things. You need to get all those food triggers out, do some things to heal the gut, and then reintroduce foods again to when the body can tolerate them better. So this reintroduction phase can include, reintroducing the tomato family, the nightshade veggies, reintroducing nuts, seeds, legumes, and some grains, and for some people, reintroducing dairy. As I mentioned already, you can follow this great leaky gut diet, but it's not necessarily the foods that are just the problem. So I'd say for some percentage of people, the food is the trigger for leaky gut, but I'd say the majority of the time, it's not just the food. There's other things, there's other stressors in the gut, in the person's lifestyle, that are keeping the gut from healing. And it's very important to address those if you truly want to resolve the situation. So this is an example of some of the different causes. I'm sure there's a lot of other causes that I haven't listed here and that scientists aren't aware of yet. So that, like I said, sometimes there's a big food trigger like gluten. Alcohol can really wear down the gut lining too. For some people, just in general, their lifestyle is not supporting the body to heal. They've got a lot of chemical exposure, perhaps. They're not getting enough rest, have a lot of stress. They don't have their diet quite dialed in. Some medications that people will take can actually trigger leaky gut, like Miralax. And over-the-counter pain relievers are known to trigger leaky gut. Some people have chronic infections like Candida or H. pylori or other parasites. And so it can be very important to identify those because they might just kind of be in this vicious cycle of food sensitivities that will clear up once the infection is cleared in the gut. Some things in our food, like glyphosate, which is known as Roundup, which is a very common pesticide that's in the food source, it's in the rainwater. This will cause leaky gut too. So just eating conventional food can set someone up for developing leaky gut. Also, a depletion of some key nutrients that we need, like glutathione, which is an antioxidant that we make in our bodies, or vitamin D, which people are very commonly deficient in around here in Wisconsin, because we can only make vitamin D for about a third of the year, optimal levels of vitamin D. The rest of the year, we don't get enough UV to be able to make vitamin D to store it. And these are things that protect the gut lining. So we know from scientific studies that when that antioxidant glutathione drops in the body, we're much more susceptible to leaky gut. So glutathione is this antioxidant I'm talking about. It's also called L-glutathione, and it is very important in supporting our immune system. So you or someone you love may be that person who's always having chronic allergies. That can be a sign that the immune system is needing more support, like more glutathione, to keep it from overreacting to every little thing the person encounters. Glutathione also keeps the blood-brain barrier intact, which is very important for cognition, especially as we're aging. And it keeps the gut barrier intact, which is very important for not developing leaky gut. And it generally works as an antioxidant when we're under stress. So sometimes people under chronic stress have low levels of glutathione, and then they become more exposed to leaky gut. An example would be somebody that works with chemicals, is around a lot of chemical fumes, maybe an artist or a mechanic, or I mean, there's a number of different jobs where people use chemicals. And when you're exposed to those, your body is so cool. It's designed to detoxify these toxic chemicals, but it uses up your glutathione reserve. And if you're not replacing that, then that can end up as leaky gut. And then you know what can develop after leaky gut develops. Vitamin D is also very critical. So this would be kind of the next general step. Besides following the leaky gut diet, I would say make sure a couple of key things are well supported in your body, and that is vitamin D and also glutathione. So for glutathione, you can get a supplement. You can also take something called NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which is the amino acid that helps the liver to recycle the glutathione in your body. Things like cold water therapy, cold water swimming help boost glutathione production. Coffee enema is another way to boost glutathione levels. Raw milk is a natural source of glutathione, though may not be appropriate on a leaky gut diet for most people. For most people, if they've got a nourishing diet of grass-fed meats, including organ meats, healthy eggs, fresh produce, then they may have enough precursors to make glutathione. But like I said before, if you go through a lot of extensive stress, trauma, or a lot of chemical stress, heavy metal stress in your lifetime, those things all will deplete glutathione levels. So you may get to a point where you need to do something a little more proactive to help build up glutathione levels. Here's an example of some of the glutathione supplements. Orthomolecular is a local Wisconsin company that makes a good quality product. Empirical Labs has this liposomal form, which for some people is a little easier to absorb, but I find both the capsulated and the liposomal to be very effective for people if they're good quality. Those can be expensive though, so let me back up for a second. Usually if after somebody supplements for a couple of months, I would switch them to an N-acetylcysteine, which is more economical and will just help to recycle that glutathione level that you worked on building up. There generally aren't any contraindications with taking a glutathione, except it does help the body to detoxify things, as I mentioned. So a person who's pregnant or nursing probably wouldn't be the best time to start a glutathione supplement for the first time. You'd want to wait to go through a detoxification phase. I don't find that people get very symptomatic though. I've had a couple people feel sick maybe the first day or two on glutathione, but most of the people I work with have already started changing their diet. They've got some healthy lifestyle pieces in place. And so it's pretty uncommon for people to feel ill when they start glutathione. But I did want to put that out there that sometimes there's a very small reaction that passes within a day or two when people start taking it, as it's detoxifying them. Vitamin D is very critical for keeping the barriers in the body strong. So we want that gut lining nice and tight. We want to have adequate vitamin D levels to do that. The best way to make vitamin D is through the sunshine, but the only window in Wisconsin we have is like from June to August, and you really got to be out there a couple of hours every day getting direct exposure. And then that leaves you without a supply the rest of the year. So I suggest for most people something called a Spurdy vitamin D lamp, because you will get so many more benefits for your gut by making vitamin D with a light than you will with a supplement. For those that can't access the light, then a supplement can certainly be helpful. You're just not getting all of the benefits that you get otherwise. I have a whole webinar on vitamin D. There's a lot of things to talk about related to vitamin D, including some associated vitamins, vitamin A and K. So I encourage you to check out that webinar, or you can reach out to me and I can point you to the webinar. On my website, there's a news tab. So that's humannaturellc.com. I'll have it up at the end of the talk. And there's a news tab on the website, and I have all of my webinars recorded there, and you can access them for free. And I really encourage you to watch the vitamin D one if you haven't. The next step would be, let's do some things to control inflammation. Sure, the diet is going to help control inflammation. The vitamin D and the glutathione are going to help control inflammation just naturally. But this is another step further that I find most people need, is using natural botanicals like turmeric from turmeric root, or resveratrol, which here is pictured from the Japanese knotweed plant, and providing these anti-inflammatory support on a regular basis, like a daily basis, really helps the immune system to actually train its cells to be more, just respond more appropriately. So the immune system's then just not having autoimmune behavior. It's not reacting to every little thing, not having these allergic responses, happening to weird things. And so those two substances are a couple of my favorites, though there's many other herbals that can be used to help reduce inflammation. The next step would be to do things that soothe and repair the lining. I like this formula called GI Revive. One of the active ingredients, which you can get elsewhere, is called L-glutamine. L-glutamine, not to be confused with L-glutathione. L-glutamine is an amino acid that helps the gut cells to talk to each other. And so when someone's gut is leaky, a lot of times it can really help seal up the gut. And zinc carnosine is another ingredient that's really good at that. So I like to use a supplement like this to actually help reverse and heal the gut. So you kind of need all of these different pieces. You've got to be eating right, because if you're continuing to eat triggers, then the gut's going to stay leaky. You've got to make sure your gut is supported with vitamin D and glutathione. And you've got to have some anti-inflammatories to kind of get the whole mess under control and better train the immune system to be healthier in the long term. But this kind of repair the gut lining formula is usually a powder that you take in water 1 to 2 times a day. You've typically got to do it for a minimum of 3 months to heal the gut lining. It can also help to do probiotics. I like this probiotic called ProGurt. It's the highest dose probiotic available on the market without a prescription. So it's 1 trillion critters, and all these good critters go in there, and they can really help the gut to recover as well. You can also add probiotics in with fermented foods if you don't have a histamine issue. So like sauerkraut and kimchi are examples of that. Also, eating prebiotic foods is important too. So a couple of my favorites for that would be lentils and mung beans. which are properly prepared and reintroduced after being on the leaky gut diet for a couple of months. And then cruciferous vegetables like cabbage and cauliflower and broccoli are also really good. This is another product that's really good for leaky gut that I found. It's called Ione, and it's basically made from buried soil. So it's like a dirt water. It's called a terahydrite supplement, and it feeds the good bacteria and helps the gut cells to communicate better with each other, and actually helps the gut biome to develop naturally and diversify. So I found this supplement to be really helpful when there's leaky gut, or there's problems with absorption, and there's nutrient deficiencies, or there's a lot of food sensitivities and food reactions. So we're back to this picture of the microscopic slides. And you can see again, on the left is the picture of the healthy gut. So we see all of the cells together. In the middle is a picture of the leaky gut. And in this case, this picture was taken when the person ate a conventional apple that had an average amount of glyphosate on it that you would just find in a conventional apple. So it just kind of blows my mind that just eating a conventional apple with that low level of glyphosate on it could cause leaky gut like it did in this study. And then we see on the right what happens when the amount of glyphosate in the apple is combined with the Ione supplement I was just talking about. So the presence of that supplement really helps the gut to maintain its integrity despite the exposure to Roundup. So in general, it's going to be better to choose organic foods to minimize your glyphosate exposure. But for those times when you need to eat out or you don't have total control, and none of us really have total control over what we eat, even if we're buying organic, we're going to get some contamination and some exposure to glyphosate. So the Ione, the terahydrite supplement is really very helpful in maintaining the healthy gut cells. So it's important, if you want to have a healthy gut, to follow a diet that's important to you, to make sure you're supported with glutathione or NAC and acetylcysteine. Turmeric and resveratrol are things that you'll get best results if you take them with fat, and they can really help with controlling some of the inflammation that's associated with a leaky gut. Vitamin D is very important, as well as vitamins A and K, which are associated with it. Probiotics can be helpful. Digestive enzymes we haven't talked about much, but these are a health supplement that basically help provide extra enzymes to break down the food. And this is really valuable because if you're breaking your food down completely, you're going to break it down to the nutrient level where you're not going to have an immune reaction. If you're not breaking your food down completely, then your immune system is getting enabled to break it down. And that's where it's much more likely for you to develop sensitivities and develop inflammation. We also talked about using basic gut support like the glutamine, the GI Revive, the Ione supplement, and then a little plug here for some rest and relaxation. The body does amazingly restore and do a lot of the work we need it to do and detoxify when we get enough rest. We also need enough physical activity too, so you have to have a good balance of exercise as well as sleep and rest. There are some cases where the steps I just outlined just aren't working or aren't enough to help someone resolve leaky gut. And this is where I use special assessments to help identify where the person needs support. And certainly this can be done from the beginning too. One of these approaches would be to look at all of your blood work. You can get blood work done with a doctor or have someone like myself order blood work. And I use what's called functional ranges, which means that I'm looking for optimal numbers. For example, vitamin D, the medical range is 30 to 80, even though a healthy target is closer to 60. So I would help someone who's maybe 28 or 30 or 35 who really does not have enough vitamin D to have a healthy gut lining, to see, hey, you need to work on getting your vitamin D up to 60. And there's really quite a lot of information in all of the basic blood chemistry tests that can really help be more savvy and optimize someone's health. So I help people with reading those tests and identifying where to get support. The GI map stool test is what's pictured here. This is a comprehensive, very helpful test for understanding what the heck is going on in someone's gut and where do they need to focus their energy to get better. Also, the food sensitivity panels, like I talked about with Cyrex Lab, can sometimes be instrumental with helping someone identify what steps to take to get better. But to talk about the GI map for a couple more minutes, I really like this test because it's extremely sensitive. It's way, way more sensitive than a stool test you're going to get at the medical doctor or most medical doctors. And that's because when they do a GI map, they're counting every single cell in your sample. And so they're not just looking under a microscope, they're actually using what's called a PCR analysis to count every cell. So you're going to know even if something is present in a very low level. And this can be very important for people that have an infection that's getting missed by the standard medical system, or they're just not sick enough to have things identified, but you can feel that something's off. I also find the test results are highly relevant. So they usually explain the picture and the symptoms that someone's got and how they relate back to the gut biome. And it's very comprehensive. It's going to describe your good bacteria, your bad bacteria, and a lot of intestinal health markers. So just to give you an example for a minute, the report from the GI map is several pages long, but this is the last page that goes over different intestinal health markers. So for example, I'm going to see steatocrit. So steatocrit is a reading for how well someone is digesting fat. Sometimes in and of itself, the inability to handle fat can cause a lot of problems for somebody. Elastase 1 is a marker for pancreatic enzymes. So reading this level will know if the person needs extra digestive enzymes or not, or if the situation is set up such that they've got an infection leading to a drop in the enzymes that needs to be addressed. Beta-glucuronidase is a toxin made by bacteria that basically blocks the ability of the colon to detoxify. So this is really helpful in this person's case, seeing how high this level of beta-glucuronidase was, because this person kept trying to do an antimicrobial approach to work on their gut, and they kept getting sick. They weren't able to detoxify, so they needed a specific supplement to help with detoxifying the colon while they were doing the rest of the program so that they wouldn't get sick every time they tried a healthy protocol. We look for blood in the stool. We also count something called secretory IgA. This is really helpful because I find in, I don't know, maybe a third of the people I work with that their immune system is really exhausted. And this will make it an uphill battle to try to heal a chronic health situation or optimize the gut health. And so knowing that this secretory IgA, which is a marker for the immune response, is low, we can put some things in their program to shore up the immune system and make sure we're really supporting the immune system first. And that makes everything else in the protocol work a lot better. Anti-gliadin IgA is a marker for leaky gut. And sorry, I was just reading, somebody posted a comment. And so we know how sensitive a person is to gluten and whether or not gluten is a problem. Calprotectin is a marker for inflammation, specifically in the colon. So again, we kind of have a gauge of, how important those anti-inflammatories might be, if those should be a priority or not. And then zonulin is the last marker. This is a marker directly for leaky gut. And so we know, do we definitely have leaky gut here and we need to be very aggressive about some of these leaky gut supplements, or are the problems more attributed to something else? So doing this GI map test, it's about $420. It does have a big price tag, but it's always worth it to identify these different things. Okay, so to finalize things, I would say leaky gut is actually a lot more common than most people probably realize. The symptoms can be alleviated by following a leaky gut diet. The advanced testing can be really helpful in creating an individual plan to help repair and overcome the health problems associated with the leaky gut. Supplements like turmeric, glutathione, glutamine, iron, probiotics, these are all really helpful things that can be used to help heal the gut. And minimizing our chemical exposure, eating organic foods appears to be one of a number of things we can do to help reduce the stress to the gut lining. Vitamin D is also extremely critical in terms of keeping the gut healthy. So just to remind you, I have those $45 sessions at the Willie Street Co-op. I actually have a couple available next Wednesday, the 25th at Willie West. And then I have some more available at East and West the following week, the first week of June. So if you're interested to sit down with me one-on-one to schedule those, you have to reach out to me, and I do ask people to prepay for the session. And thank you so much.